Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf Samachalef is about a machlokas which we have learned between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon. Their machlokas is if part of the blood of the par or the sire of the Kohen Gadol spills before it's finished being used, how do you continue from there? Everybody agrees that you have to bring a new par or a new sire in order to replace the blood and continue the sprinkling. The question is, where do you start from? So the sprinkling is divided into three parts, three or perhaps a fourth, three main sections. That's the sprinkling inside the Kodesh Kodashim, between the poles of the Aron. That's one. The next is the sprinkling in the Heichal towards the Parochos. And the third is the application of the blood on the Mizbeach, the inner golden Mizbeach. Now they all agree that if you completed one part and then it's spilled, you start from the next part with the next animal's blood, with the replacement animal's blood. The question is, what if it spills in the middle? So according to Rabbi Meir, you have to go back to the beginning. According to Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, you pick up where you left off. Now, the Gemara is going to show a brisa related to this. The Gemara is then going to try to compare other similar halachos, like the oil of a mitzora, the oil used in the purification of a mitzora, which also has similar steps and also might spill. It would have to be replaced, as well as the blood of the asham of a mitzora. Some other halachos about the blood of the asham of a mitzora. And then the Gemara will move on and discuss what you do with the extra blood and the carcass of the extra animals now that you have more animals. So let's begin. We've seen this machlokas. So the Gemara quotes a brisa, which brings a drasha that explains what's mechaper for what. And this will lead into our machlokas. So the brisa is expounding on a pasuk at the end of the Yom Kippur Avoda. We'll actually have two brises with two similar pasukim. The first one is v'chiper es mikdash hakodesh v'zomod v'es hamizbeach yichaper v'al kohanim v'al kol am kol yichaper. All these things that the Kohen Gadol is mechaper, that he achieves atonement for all his parts of the avodah that he does. So the Gemara says as follows: v'chiper es mikdash hakodesh refers to the Kodesh Kodashim. If somebody brings a tumah or enters b'tumah into the Kodesh Kodashim, that's niskaper by this phrase. This phrase is referring to that kapara v'chiper es mikdash hakodesh. Ol moed, that refers to the heichal. The ol moed in the Mishkan was the equivalent of the heichal in the Beis Hamikdash. Mizbeach, that means the Mizbeach. Again, all these are referring to tumah that was if somebody came there b'tumah or brought tumah into or on any of these things. Next it says yichaper. So that yichaper refers to the rest of the Beis Hamikdash, the other azaros. Hakohanim refers to the Kohanim. V'al kol am hakol refers to the rest of Klal Yisrael, the Yisraelim. Yichaper refers to the Levim. Says the brisa, this is putting all these different types of kapara together to show that they all have an equal kapara with the same thing. The problem is they don't have an equal kapara with the same thing, because the par we know is for the Kohanim. He says vidui for Kohanim, and the soyer is for the Yisraelim. So what sense are they all the same thing? So this brisa concludes they're all the same, that they all get kapara from the sar mishtaleach. The other sar, the goat that gets sent off the cliff, he brings kapara for everybody. For other averes besides for tumah, these karbanas are all for tumah. Other averes besides for tumah are niskaper by the sar mishtaleach, and that's equal for everybody, and that's where there's an equality here for everyone. Now, the second brisa brings another pasuk which comes midway in the avoda, and it says as follows: "V'chiper mikaper sakodesh v'zoamoid v'eshamizbeach." So it's showing that these are three different things. There's the kodesh, the moed, and the mizbeach. That refers to the sprinkling of the blood on the kodesh kodashim, the sprinkling of the blood on the parochos and the moed, which is the heichal, and the sprinkling of the blood on the mizbeach. And this shows that these three things are divided into three parts. And these are the three parts that if you finish the whole part and then the blood spilled, you don't have to do that part over. You just have to start from the next part. That's at least the one part of the halacha that everybody else agrees to. The Gemara then goes through that each of the three parts, though, If you didn't finish the part and the blood spilled, you have to shecht another one and start over again. Where do you start over again? Machlokes Rabbi Meir says you start from the beginning of the part, and Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar say you start from where you left off. So now the Gemara explains what is our machlokes about. The Gemara explains this is how you understand the pasuk, and the same pasuk is used for each of them to prove his opinion. What's the pasuk? It says midam chatas hakipurim achas bashana. It says v'chipar Aaron al karnos achas bashana. Midam chatas hakipurim achas bashana. It says you should do it once a year. You do this. What is this once a year? So the Gemara says Rabbi Meir will tell you it means you only allowed to use one animal. You have to have the entire section of sprinklings be done with the blood of one animal. You cannot split it. That the first few were with one par, let's say, and then it's spilled, and then you're taking a different par. It has to be one. That's how he understands it. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar say no. It's going to tell you only how to do it once. You can't repeat it with a second animal. You're telling me, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Meir is saying you have to go back to the beginning and start over. That means that the sprinklings that you did already, you're going to end up doing twice. Once with the first cow, which spilled, and once with the second cow, which is its replacement. They're saying do it once. And therefore you pick up where you left off, you don't do anything repeated a second time at all. Okay. Says the Gemara, you find a very similar discussion about the parts of the purification of a mitzvah. Mitzvah has to bring oil, a log of oil. Part of that is sprinkled on the paroches. Part of that is put on his thumb and big toe, and part of that is put on his earlobe. The rest of it is poured on his head. 4 different things here. Now, the pouring on the head, that's the same as the 4th step of the blood of the Yom Kippur animals. That 4th thing is that it's poured on the yesod of the mizbeach, the ledge at the bottom of the mizbeach. Now the Brisa before also said that they don't argue that is not ma'akev. If you did all the other 3 parts and you didn't pour the blood on the mizbeach, that's not a problem. That you don't have to do. That's just what you do with the leftovers. If there is no leftovers because it's spilled, that's fine. That everybody agrees to. Same thing applies here with the oil that gets poured on the head afterwards. That's just leftovers, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. That does not have to be redone. However, what if the oil, the loig shemen, spilled while you were doing the other things? So again, here you have the 3 parts. You have the sprinkling on the paroches. You have the thumb and the big toe that counts as 1, and you have the ears. So these 3 things, you have the same machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Meir. If it spills in between, if it spills in the middle of one of the parts, do you have to start from the beginning of the part, or do you have to pick up where you left off? Now, the Gemara mentions that Rebbe first was told by Rabbi Yaakov that it's different. There is no machlokes in this case. And the Gemara brings a brisa that clearly says that there is a machlokes here also. And the Gemara therefore changes what Rabbi Yaakov said, that there is a machlokes. The same machlokes applies here. Again, if you do a whole part and then it spills, you don't have to do that part over again. However, if it spills in the middle of the part, do you have to start from the beginning, or do you not have to start from the beginning? Now, the Gemara now takes issue with the idea that the leftovers that you pour on his head is not ma'akev. It's not a problem if that spills. And says, why not? Just because it calls it leftovers? There are other things that are called leftovers that very much are ma'akev. For example, in a carbon mincha, you take off a handful, that's the kmitza, and then it says that the leftovers should be eaten. The halacha is that if some of those leftovers are lost before the kmitza is put on the mizbech, it's puzzle. You can't put the kmitza on the mizbech if some of the leftovers aren't there. So you see, the leftovers are very important. You can't just ignore the leftovers and say, oh, it's leftovers. The Gemara says this is different. These are not just leftovers. These are the leftovers of the leftovers. Because the pasuk, when it's describing what you put on the ears, it says you take the leftovers from what you put on the thumb and the big toe, and you take those leftovers, you put them on the ears. Now this is leftovers of the leftovers. So leftovers of the leftovers, that already is not ma'akev according to everybody. You don't need to worry about that. Okay, now the Gemara talks about the carbon that the mitzvah has to bring. He has to bring in a carbon asham, which the pasuk says has some of its own rules, and in some ways it's just like a carbon chatas. So the question here is as follows. Let's say this carbon asham is brought, But it comes out that it was brought shalei lishma, it was brought with the wrong intent. So usually, we're going to go with the opinion that the halacha is that if it's brought, it's a kosher carbon, you're allowed to be makriv, you're allowed to put its parts on the mizbeach, even if the shechita was done wrongly, you're allowed to put the parts on the mizbeach, but it does not serve the purpose that the owner intended for it. It is not a mitzaros carbon asham. The question is, what does he do now? So Gemara has a machlokas if Rav Meir and Rav Elazar and Rav Shimon would argue about this as well. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan would say it's the same machlokas. Rabbi Meir would say it's fine. You just have to bring another carbon. It's not a problem. Part of the carbon was performed. You did part of the carbon. You did the shechita. It's a kosher shechita. You can't use it, so you bring another carbon. Not a problem. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, however, would say that here it's Einloi Takana, says Rabbi Yochanan. There's nothing you could do here, because you can't just bring another carbon, because we see that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say that you don't just redo things. You can't just ignore what you did before and do it again. So here also, you can't just redo the carbon asham. Just like the blood that's spilled, you don't redo the parts you did. This carbon asham, which came out to be shalei lishma, you can't just redo it. And here, you can't bring another one. And the reason you can't bring another one is because the Torah describing it says that you should bring achas. It says keves echad. It says you're only allowed to bring one. You're not allowed to bring more than one. And if it gets messed up, the mitzvah is stuck. He cannot complete his tahara process, and it's a problem. So Gemara, that's Rabbi Yochanan's approach. Gemara says Rav Chizda says that there's no machlokas here. Even Rabbi Meir would agree that there's nothing he could do. And the reason is that the Torah tells us v'hikriv oisei la'asham v'esleig hasham, and it says you have to take that carbon asham together, take it together with the oil that he brought, which shows that you can't replace it. You have to take that one. You have to take the mitzvah brings oil and a keves, a sheep, and you got to take that one. You cannot replace it with a different one. So even Rabbi Meir would agree here that it's not replaceable. There's a special pasuk that says it has to be the same one. Okay, so we have machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Chizda. Is the carbon asham of a mitzvah replaceable if it was not done properly? So the Gemara says, well, we have a brayso that seems to indicate, just like Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Meir at least would say, there's somebody out there who says that it is replaceable. Where do you see that? So the wording of his brayso, it says that if a carbon asham of a mitzvah was shech d'shlei lishma, or you didn't put the blood properly on the thumb and the big toe, it goes on the mizbeach, requires nesachim. It's a kosher carbon, requires nesachim, doesn't serve the purpose. Tzarich asham achar lachshir. You need to bring a carbon asham achar. You have to bring a different one. So that seems to indicate that you could bring a different one. You could replace it. Now, Rabbi Yochanan and Chizda both agree that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon hold you can't replace it. They're arguing about whether Rabbi Meir holds that way. So you see that Rabbi Yochanan is backed up, is supported by this brayso, because there's somebody at least out there who says that you could replace it. Someone says Rabbi Chizda will tell you, no, this brayso is not telling you that you could replace it. It doesn't say you could replace it. It says you need to replace it. It means you need to replace it, but you can't, so you're stuck. So Gemara says, what? Is that how Tanaim speak? They say you need to do something. If you can't do it, what's the point of saying you need to if you can't? So Gemara says, yeah, I will find you another place where a brayso, where a Tana uses the words you need to, and he means you can't. Where is that? What happens when a Nazir finishes his Nazirus? So he's supposed to shave his head. It says that he should. It says while he's a Nazir, tar lo yavra roshel, a razor cannot pass on his head. And from there we learn that after, when he's finished, a razor should pass on his head. He shaves his head. So what happens if he's bald already? What happens if he doesn't have any hair? He happens to be a bald guy. So the Gemara says machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says you don't have to do it. The whole point is to remove your hair. You don't have to do it. It's fine. Beis Shammai says you need tzarich havaras tar. You have to move the razor over his head. Now, what does he mean by that? So the Gemara says that Rav Avina said that what he means is you have to, and you can't. You have to remove his hair, and you can't because he doesn't have hair. So therefore, you see here clearly the Ravina, the way he understands Beis Shammai, he says you have to, and it means you can't. And therefore, that'll support Rav Chizda's explanation of what the brayso means when it says you have to bring another carbon asham. Also, you have to and you can't. Gemara notes that Rav Pedas argues on Rav Avina's understanding of Beis Shammai. When Beis Shammai said you have to, Rav Avina said you have to and you can't. Rav Pedas said that's not what it means. Where do you see Rav Pedas says that it's not what it means? And what does Beis Shammai want you to do? So Rav Padas indicates Beis Shammai wants you to just move a razor over his head. It won't be cutting anything off, but just do the shaving motion. Where do you see that? So Gemara says that Rav Padas said that this Beis Shammai is very similar to a different statement by Rabbi Elazar. What's that? He's talking about what happens if you want to put the blood or the oil of a Mitzayra on his finger, on his thumb, and on his big toe, but he doesn't have a thumb or a big toe. So what do you do there? So in that brisa, Rabbi Elazar says you just put it where it used to be. You put it on the closest spot. You can't put it where it's supposed to be, so you put it on what's left behind. That's the same, says Rav Padas, as this Beis Shammai that says that you can't pass a razor to cut off his hair. Pass a razor over his head without cutting off his hair. That counts. You're putting it in the place where what was supposed to be there is not there. That's good enough. Now, Agav, in that brisa, there are some other solutions that are offered. The Gemara says that over there, Rabbi Shimon suggests you could use the left thumb and a big toe. Ordinarily, you use the right one, but if he doesn't have a right one, you use the left one. And the Gemara also says that there's a Tana Kama there that says that there's nothing what to do. You have to, he can't be mitar, he cannot do the avoda the right way. Okay, that's that discussion. Now the Gemara moves on to discuss a little bit of how the avoda of the carbon asham of the mitzvah is performed. And the brisa says as follows: the pasuk which describes getting the blood from the carbon asham of the mitzvah says the following thing. It says, "V'lokach hakohen midam asham." He should take some of the blood. That's usually the phrase that's used to say that he's catching the blood. He's doing a kabbalah. And right away it says, "V'nasan hakohen al tinoch ozen mitar hayamana." So you should put it on the earlobe of the mitar, the right earlobe. So it connects the velokach and the v'nasan. Says the brisa that both of them have to be by hand. Just like he has to put it on the earlobe by hand, he has to catch it, he has to take it from the neck by hand. So Gemara says maybe you'll think that the blood is going to go on the mizbeach should also be caught by hand. That's not, because later in the pasuk it says ki kachatas ha'ashamhu. It has it's just like a carbon chatas, and just like a carbon chatas, you need to catch the blood in a kli, in a vessel, and then put it on the mizbech. Here also you need to catch the blood in a kli and then put it on the mizbech. Says the Gemara, it comes out that two kohanim are needed. One is going to catch the blood in his hand, one will catch it in a kli. The one who catches it in his hand will go put it on the ear of the mitzvah. The one who catches it in a kli will go apply it to the mizbech. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the karbanos of Yom Kippur, and it goes back to the situation where you had to replace blood. Blood spilled, you had to replace it, you had to bring in other animals. What do you do with the old animals? You have now, let's say the blood of the par spilled. So you have the carcass of the old par, and you have the carcass of the new par. So what are you supposed to do? So generally, if you have only one, the Torah says you have to burn it outside the camp in the place of the deshen, the place where you put the ashes from the mizbech, has to be burned there. And the person who moves it there is tameh. His clothing becomes tameh. So the question is, does that apply to both animals here? So the Gemara says it's a machokis. Rav Elazar and Rav Shimon say that it applies to all these animals. If you had to replace it, all the replacements and the original all have to go out and be burned in this manner. The Chachamim say, no, only the last one. The previous ones don't count. It only applies to the last one because that's the one that completes the kapara. That's where the kapara happens with the last one, and therefore that's the one that you have to do. So the Gemara says that Rav asked a question from Rav Nachman. Let's say you have to replace the goat, the sire. So what are you going to do with the mate of the sire? Now the sire was selected when there were two seirim, and we drew lots to see which one goes off the cliff, Lazazel, and which one becomes the carbon chatas. Those lots have to be drawn. If you lose the sire because you spill the blood, you have to bring another one. You have to bring two, and you have to draw lots again because you can't just take one without drawing lots, as we shall see at length on the next stuff. So now you're going to have two that go off the cliff. So what do you do with them? So Rava asked Rav Nachman, how many do you send off the cliff? You send them all? Let's say you have 2 or 3 or 4. You send them all off the cliff or just the last one? So he said, what do you mean? You're supposed to send the herd off the cliff? It says to send one off the cliff. So he said, no, that's true. So then why did we say, at least according to one opinion, that you take all the cows or sires that have to be burned outside the camp, they all have to be burned outside the camp? What, you're supposed to burn a herd? It only says to burn one. So Rava said, what kind of question is that? As far as the Soyer, it says, send it off the cliff. It's only what? It says, Oisoi. As far as the part, it doesn't say that word, and therefore the burning could be done on all of them.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.